Welcome to the Book Nook. I hope you'll enjoy your stay. My name's Kyle. At the end of December, I set myself a really ambitious goal for a reading list for January. I wanted to read these 5 books. And, at first it seemed not so bad. It didn't seem like a ton, like anything super out of the ordinary or crazy. But then, as the month started going on, I thought about it. I started thinking, and I realized the last time I read 5 books was the summer after my freshman year of college, when I read all 5 of the Game of Thrones books in 1 month. And I realized doing that meant spending basically every waking moment before my part-time job reading a book, which at the time was fine. It wasn't super bad. But now I have a full-time job. I have a wife who I like to cook dinner with, hang out with, and who I like to watch TV with. So all of those things put together kind of resulted in that book list not quite getting to where it was meant to get to. In the end, I only ended up reading 1 of those books, The Lights of Prague by Nicole Jarvis. Even though I only read this 1 book in January, I still wanted to review it for you guys. I still wanted to tell you, what I thought, how it went, and should you guys read it. So, The Lights of Prague is an urban fantasy set in the mid-19th century in, you might be surprised to hear it, but the city of Prague. It follows 2 main characters, a lamplighter named Domek, and a vampire named Aura. Now, Domek's job as a lamplighter is to light the lamps in the city of Prague at night. And along with that, he also has to hunt vampires, spirits, all sorts of things at night, all sorts of supernatural things at night that might try to harm people of the city. Meanwhile, Aura, she's a vampire who's been alive for centuries at this point, and she's kind of done with the whole vampire society. She doesn't want to hurt people anymore. And for the most part, the blood that she drinks comes from the butcher, from cows and animals like that. The 2 of them know each other tangentially, and through the course of the story, they get to know each other more and more, and even end up having a small, well, more than a small romance in the story. That romance, honestly, actually ends up being, to me, probably the best part of the entire story. But we'll get to that later. Now, Domek. In the story, he ends up meeting a will-o'-the-wisp that had been captured by a vampire. And with that will-o'-the-wisp, named Kaja, he ends up getting dragged into a conspiracy that threatens to destroy the entire city. Both he and Aura, actually, end up getting dragged into it. That's pretty much the summary of the plot of the book. Now, would I say that it was a good story? Yes, it was good. It had some predictable story beats to it, some things that were kind of like, oh, I think I see where this is going, that sort of stuff. But overall, the story was very good, and the big central mystery was genuinely mysterious. You weren't sure how it was going to get there, and when it happened, it was kind of an oh shit moment. The romance between Aura and Domek, meanwhile, honestly, like I said before, was the best part of the entire thing. Their romance, honestly, to me, felt like the real climax of the story over the climax of the story, which says something about the writing around that romance and also kind of about the rest of the story in terms of the ways that it started to fall flat. Speaking of falling flat, the writing, while again good, tended to over-describe in some places. And I would say some passages ran on longer than they kind of needed to. The epilogue, for example, wasn't really as necessary as it may at first have seemed reading it. It felt like a good 10 pages that I probably could have avoided. There was a mystery in it that I didn't realize was supposed to be a mystery in the story. Having it resolved didn't really do anything for me. It was just kind of there hanging out, But despite all of that, the writing was very personal. You felt for these characters. You got dragged into their world with them. Aura, Domek, even Kaja, as little character development as he had, in many ways being more of a plot device, they felt real to me. And because of that, it was fun to kind of read and see where they were going and what they were going to do in the story. And seeing them come together was just really cool and really fun. Aura, for example, was intelligent, flirty. Honestly, through most of the story, one of my favorite parts to read. Hers had a lot of intrigue going on, political intrigue, actually, getting dragged into this conspiracy that's enveloping the story in the city through people that she knows as a vampire who's been around for centuries and has acquired her own sort of wealth. Domek, meanwhile, tended to be kind of broody and maybe a little bit self-righteous. He doesn't like vampires at all, which when you read the story is kind of understandable. He's got a bit of a bad background with monsters in this world, as you might expect. If it's going to kill people. But nonetheless, he has a good heart in him and he wants to do the right thing. Despite that, and honestly, in a way, This kind of makes his chapters infuriatingly fun to read, if that makes sense. He's very blockheaded. There's a mystery around Kaja in the story, and what exactly is a will-o'-the-wisp? What exactly is he doing in this jar? Why do the vampires want him? All of those questions becomes very abundant very quickly based off of the information that you're given in probably the first quarter of the book, I would say. And Domek doesn't manage to put it together until it's literally spelled out for him by Kaja, which is, again, you know, it's infuriating. You don't get to see him really come to these answers on his own. He's literally told them in a way that, when you're reading, feels like it's supposed to be a big reveal, but isn't really, because you already kind of put two and two together. Like I said, he's a dunce, but it works for the setting of the story, and it doesn't take away from him as a character. If anything, somehow it ends up making him a little bit more endearing. Kaja, finally, he can be more of a plot device, but he still has character growth of his own, and he starts out as this character who really doesn't want to help Domek, and at the end is helping him with a bunch of different things, including saving lives. And seeing the growth of their relationship is probably one of the most fun and interesting things that happens in the entire story. Building off of that, though, in terms of the relationship between Domek and Kaja, a lot of the emotional beats in the story didn't land for me. They don't feel earned. Moments that are supposed to be big climactic moments in the story just kind of happen, and you don't feel the emotional weight that the characters themselves are feeling. The only time that really happens in the story, again, is with the romance between Aura and Domek. You see it building through the entire first half of the story, which I think is why eventually it does give you that kind of catharsis that you look for in emotions in books, because you've seen it coming this whole time, and eventually it comes and it's there, and it just kind of explodes on the page, if you'll allow the wording. But beyond that, much of it, including the actual climax of the story, don't quite hit in the way that it feels the author meant them to hit, which is a little disappointing, because they are pretty cool moments to read, in all honesty. And in that way, the whole story for this book feels like it's trying to be this big, grand, sweeping narrative, and ultimately that just doesn't end up working the way that you kind of hope that it will. Now, all of that said, the world building, really solid. This is a world that I wish I could know more about, and honestly, I tried to see if I could find fan art of the Pija Vice, and all I really ended up finding is that word, which I'm still probably mispronouncing horribly, is the word for leech in Czech, which seems pretty apt. But, you know, between the will-o'-the-wisps, and there's even a Bogart at one point, or not a Bogart, that's a thing in Harry Potter, a sort of boogeyman stand-in creature. Vampires themselves. All of these creatures are described in deep, rich, fascinating detail, and the vampires themselves get a description involving the way when they start to transform into their more vampire-y way, how the fangs come out from their mouths as the second jaw, and their claws grow longer. It's really interesting and fascinating, and I would love to see some fan art of what these creatures look like, or how people think they look. Overall, for me, this book was a good book. I would definitely suggest reading it. For me, this was a 3 out of 5 stars. It was a good story. It was a good premise. It was a fun read, but just some of the elements fell flat and didn't work quite the way that you get the feeling they were meant to as you read it. That is The Lights of Prague by Nicole Jarvis. If you liked this video, if you found it helpful, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Is there anything that you've read lately? What are you guys reading? Let me know. Comment below. Thanks for visiting the Nook. I'll see you next time.